My guest today is Callan. Callan is the co-founder and CPO at Threshold Labs, building all sorts of interesting things in, Bitcoin DeFi, really. Hey, welcome to the show, Callan.
Yeah, pleasure to be here, Andy. Thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you here. Let's do what we do at the beginning of the show. It would be super cool if you could please introduce yourself. Would love to hear, some of your personal and professional backstory. What have you been doing in the lead up to co-founding Threshold Labs?
Yeah, certainly. So my name's Callan. I go by SAP online, if people know me as that. And I've been working in the crypto space for my entire professional career since 2017, where I first formed a company that was focused on financial reporting, data analytics for the crypto space. And through that, I saw the emergence of DeFi and all of these amazing protocols that we take for granted today that just didn't exist in 2017. And of course, the many different market cycles that have come and gone. And throughout that journey, learning a lot about DeFi, working with some interesting protocols. And in 2023, I believe, I started getting involved with the Threshold DAO. I was on a few committees and guilds there, managing the tBTC liquidity strategy after the V2 launched in January of 2024. And 2024 was a really interesting year where we basically built a lot of liquidity for tBTC and got some of the basic integrations on the way and bootstrapped this asset from 0 to 1 in DeFi. And throughout that time, I kind of wrote myself a job description and posted it on the public forum at the Threshold DAO and was elected into this position, which I thought was a really interesting kind of crypto native way to get a job. And I kind of left my former company and went full time into this. And 2024, I was involved with a Bitcoin staking project. That was 2024. 2023 was the liquidity bootstrapping. Getting my years all mixed up. 2022, I was first in Threshold. Time flies. And 2024 was a Bitcoin staking protocol called Acre, incubated by Thesis, a Bitcoin venture studio. And in January of 2025, got my years right, co-founded Threshold Labs. And that was basically to focus on tBTC, which is the product we'll probably talk a little bit more about. But it's basically Bitcoin liquidity rails, a way of getting your Bitcoin into DeFi. And it first launched in 2023, the V2. And since then, it was kind of operated by a DAO. And DAOs are notoriously good at some things and bad at others. And product and growth is not necessarily the DAO's strongest suit. I think a lot of DAOs outsource that to some kind of centralized labs entity. And Threshold didn't have such an entity. So I went ahead and co-founded that with McLean Wilkerson, who's one of the original co-founders of NuCypher, which became Threshold during an on-chain merger, which is an interesting story, but maybe for another time. And since then, we've been focused on protocol and product growth for tBTC. So we have a number of exciting things that we're working on and basically looking to make tBTC the canonical Bitcoin for DeFi.
Awesome. Covered a lot of ground there, Callan. Love it. I think it'd be useful then just to hear at the beginning of the show, maybe just to briefly explain again, just I guess the difference between Threshold Labs, the Threshold Network, and then very simply what it is you guys are creating with tBTC, because that's what we're talking about. Just kind of run through those elements that make up the ecosystem, I guess.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's a pretty common kind of relationship that we see these days, like the labs company to the decentralized protocol. You have Arbitrum, for example, and they have off-chain labs or something like that working on the protocol side, and then different kind of foundation structure. And then ultimately there's like the token holder DAO. So bringing it to Threshold, there's the token holder DAO that basically you could think of as owns and operates a decentralized network based on token ownership. And they maintain the DAO treasury, they own the smart contracts, and ultimately make decisions in how those things are spent. And T Labs is a centralized entity that is a dev and growth focused entity that we basically put together a proposal. Being a DAO member, saw all the inner workings of the DAO and the bits that went well and the bits that didn't. And we proposed basically a restructure at the start of this year that said, let's wind down these functions of the DAO and let's house them in a new execution entity, T Labs, Threshold Labs, and spun that up in February to basically take over those functions. So trying to maintain the decentralized operational part of the protocol and then the execution arm in T Labs.
Yeah, got it. And yeah, just tell us a little bit more about how tBTC works. How's it different, for example, from wrapped Bitcoin? Yeah, I mean, these are kind of all, yeah, kind of doing similar things, and the end goal, I guess, is Bitcoin DeFi, which we'll talk about. But yeah, just talk us through tBTC a little bit more, how it works.
Certainly. Yeah, I think tBTC basically is a permissionless and trust minimized wrapped Bitcoin. So in that way, it's a way of getting Bitcoin into DeFi and especially out of it as well. And the key differentiator that we have is the custody system at the bottom of the stack, where you have WBTC or cBTC or these other centralized wrapped assets. All of the Bitcoin is custodied on chain. It's a bit opaque. You can't really see how it's being custodied, or even if there is a proof of reserves. I think with cBTC, they're pretty hesitant to post these things for reasonably understandable operational and security reasons, perhaps. But tBTC is different. We're basically the decentralized equivalent to these assets, which means that we're fully on chain, so you can see our full proof of reserves in real time as it gets minted and redeemed against. And the minting and redemption path is fully permissionless, which means anybody can go to our front end or to the smart contract system, create a deposit address, and deposit Bitcoin directly onto Ethereum mainnet, or we've recently just launched on Starknet, Sui, Mesochain, and a bunch of others where you can have direct Bitcoin deposits into their DeFi ecosystems. And that's one of the key differentiators for us is from a user perspective, you can have Bitcoin on the Bitcoin chain and go ahead and deploy it directly to your DeFi wallets on one of these highly scalable L2s or layer 1 chains. And from that, we've seen quite like a different way that our network is used. WBTC, for example, in terms of like the mint redemption volume is really low compared to their TVL, whereas ours is we're actually on a comparative amount of volume on a fraction of the TVL. And while I'd love to have the same amount of TVL, I think that really indicates that we're used in a different way, in that people are more interested in going in and out and minting and redeeming and kind of entering into DeFi with their Bitcoin, earning some yield, doing some trading, something like that, borrowing against their Bitcoin, and then ultimately pulling it back to Bitcoin mainnet where it's most secure.
What was that TVL, sorry?
Our TVL at the moment, I think 5.2K Bitcoin, something like that. So today's price is above 600 mil, I think, which is great watching the price go up as we're in this very interesting moment in Bitcoin's history. It seems like we're breaking out of some old patterns, but yeah, they have to keep updating that TVL figure in my mind basically every day.
Of course. And well, in terms of that, I guess, product market fit, tell us, because I can see that it's tBTC is also effectively live on different chains, right? So maybe just talk us through the chains that are supported at the moment, and I guess what that kind of product roadmap looks like in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll have to refresh myself. We're on Arbitrum, Base, Polygon, Solana, Sui, Starknet, and Meso, and Bob build on Bitcoin chain as well. Yes, Polygon. Oh. Yes, thank you. I think that's all of them.
Sui
and Sui. Sorry, missed Sui. Embarrassing.
Yeah.
There we go. So yeah, we've been launching quite a few chains recently, and I'm really excited by the uptake that we've seen there. And those deployments are really important, but they're not the only kind of way that I think about products at Threshold. Like, how can we make it more usable? How can we reduce latency in the system? And also introducing these kind of user experience improvements where on some level, I think ultimately tBTC, or like even the concept of wrapped Bitcoin in itself, will be abstracted away from users. They'll have, a Bitcoin balance on their front end, depending on, the kind of platform people want to use. Of course, if they're DeFi native, they might always go through the permissionless route and maintain full custody of their assets and keys at all times. But I think in terms of mass adoption, we're going to see a lot of abstraction take place. And then in that case, tBTC becomes more like a Bitcoin API for developers, where they can deploy Bitcoin, deploy it to yield strategies, deploy it into different vaults or staking solutions, and they do that just via the SDK, the tBTC SDK, as opposed to having to worry about this concept of a wrapped asset from a user perspective.
Yeah, makes sense. I guess the wider context or the bigger story is, Bitcoin DeFi, or DeFi in general, right? So, I'd love to understand how you think about, well, DeFi in general, but more specifically Bitcoin DeFi, kind of, where we are in that, I guess, journey to people becoming aware of what Bitcoin DeFi is, maybe the trade-offs for different, different participants in the Bitcoin ecosystem, why it would or wouldn't make sense for people to engage in DeFi, and just how you see that changing, over the years ahead, what adoption would look like. I know this is kind of big existential stuff, Callan, but, you'll be deep in the weeds on this stuff, so I think it'd be useful just to, understand how you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess from like a first principles perspective, Bitcoin being this like amazing asset that has all of these characteristics that make it so unique in terms of, being decentralized, permissionless, open access, non-custodial, and free from government control in some sense, or like it's not a fiat currency. And so it sits very differently in the current financial system, and it's built on these amazing principles that have inspired all of blockchain technology, in my opinion. But to use it today, you have to compromise on all of that and sign over your keys to some centralized entity if you want to borrow against your Bitcoin, or if you want to trade Bitcoin at high volumes and borrow against Bitcoin. For the most part, you have to sign over custody, and that changes kind of the principles on which it's built and the trust assumptions that you're operating on. So in order for Bitcoin to kind of realize its full potential, I think there's a lot of different visions for this, and some people want to do it native on Bitcoin. Some people don't want to do it at all. Some people are happy with TradFi, and they'll continue to use that. But for me, as a bit of like a kind of blockchain idealist, I would love to see an ecosystem of Bitcoin applications that don't compromise on the same trust assumptions or axioms of Bitcoin, and people can use it in a permissionless way. They can maintain full custody of their assets, full control of their assets, and they still get the same access to liquidity or lending services or yield opportunities or trading as before. And I think that's not only principled in that, like, I think generally like staying away from this idea of decentralization as a product feature in terms of adoption, and focusing more on usability and security and these kind of things. And blockchain's been really bad at the usability side of things, but I think that's going to get better and continues to get better. But where it differentiates is that if we're actually using decentralized infrastructure under the hood to drive this Bitcoin economy and this kind of activity, I think it has better trust assumptions and better security than the centralized options that are out there. And as the system kind of matures and ossifies to some extent, they're going to become really battle hardened ways of using Bitcoin. And it's just going to be better. I think people will opt to use that and build on top of that because they don't need to onboard all of the risk that comes with custodying or creating, centralized products. So that's really where tBTC fits into the picture. Is we want a really secure and highly usable Bitcoin liquidity infrastructure and programmability, so that people can build this Bitcoin ecosystem and create a better solution from a user perspective than they would if they were using CeFi. And it's still early in that piece, I think. Ultimately, we're building towards a Bitcoin economy globally, which is not being realized yet, although Bitcoin is certainly having a moment globally where it's definitely stepping out of this perception from the last 10 or 15 years, that where it's just, used for illicit stuff or not real money, or all of the stories we've heard this whole time. And now it's really stepping into its own as a mature asset, and we're seeing the broader adoption and seeing the validation from institutions. So yeah, very exciting moment for Bitcoin generally. And as that continues, I think the infrastructure beneath it is going to be really important, and that's where we're building tBTC to solve that problem.
Yeah, very well said again, Callan. Look, I mean, expand on that then. So, I mean, obviously, you're exactly right in that Bitcoin is having a moment right now. With, you know, achieved some impressive new all-time highs, and the flood of liquidity coming in via the ETFs and the Bitcoin treasury companies. Those two entities is just buying all the Bitcoins, I guess. One thing that I'm sure you'll relate to this, Callan. It's unfortunately difficult for people that aren't already crypto natives or don't already have some Bitcoin. If your average person around the world, if they look at Bitcoin now and they see it's 110, 120 USD, whatever per Bitcoin, that is a turn off, unfortunately, for most people, because they think, oh, I've missed it. And they don't, it's difficult for them to maybe think about in terms of, saving in Bitcoin $100 a week or whatever it is. How do we sort of, as much as Bitcoin is having that moment, is it okay that it's just kind of an institutional led moment, or do we still want Bitcoin to be, for the average man on the street as well, if you like, and how do we ensure that that is still the case?
Yeah, I think, it's kind of a painful realization that I've had in that, like, the current imbalance in global capital allocation is not going to change based on Bitcoin. Like, it's going to be the same. It'll probably transfer itself to Bitcoin in the same proportions, roughly speaking, depending on the rate of adoption via individuals. But it doesn't solve for wealth inequality. It's basically never been able to do that, and capital will do as capital does and take the opportunities that come. So yeah, this was when I first got into the space and seeing Bitcoin and Ethereum and the capacity to do all of this amazing global infrastructure, become a global citizen, have self-sovereign identity and these kind of things. And I think there's still a lot that can be done in that space. But ultimately, the existing institutions, the existing entities that have power in this world will continue to do so based on the system that exists. And generally, I think that's good for stability and continuity of the system. And over time, these systems will change and adapt as the solutions become more usable and coherent. But I think the bullish side of it, though, is that the system design of Bitcoin, to me, is so resilient that it's even looking at 100-year time scale, in theory, like, I think it's likely, if human civilization continues in the way that it has in terms of growth and stability, relative stability, then Bitcoin's going to outlast everything. And every fiat currency that kind of comes and goes ultimately collapses. But Bitcoin has the opportunity to outlast these waves of civilizational collapse, in theory. And so in that sense, like, anybody that's alive right now is early on Bitcoin and buying a lot, buying a little. When hyperinflation occurs or a fiat currency goes to zero, it's going to look like Bitcoin is a lot higher than 100K. It's going to, the numbers are not going to be, they're not going to make any sense. So I think buying any amount of Bitcoin is a good thing for people that have the opportunity. But if people don't have the opportunity to save full stop, then it's not going to help them.
Yeah, very pragmatic, and very much agree. Well said again, Callan. All right, well, what is another way of thinking about tBTC? Of course, is particularly you, because you're the you're the chief product officer, I guess. So it's always good to talk to product guys. So let's put a product lens on it. I guess the obvious way to do that would be what's the killer app for tBTC? What do you think of in terms of with your product hat on? How you're going to kind of scale this and drive adoption, etc.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question and one that I'd have to address in pieces because where we're at right now is not where we'll be. And we're still super early in the crypto space. Like, we're still, I don't know, feels like command line interface using a wallet in terms of, user experience still. So right now, I think what we're really focused on is creating use cases for tBTC on chain. So that might be lending markets, that might be different vaults that are managing liquidity, that could be, per collateral, for example. And all of these fundamental building blocks are kind of the use cases from a user perspective now. It's like somebody wants to use their Bitcoin, they need to have things to do with it. And there has to be an ecosystem that is interesting enough and composable enough that people can be quite flexible with the strategies that they deploy. I think right now, like earning more Bitcoin is of a lot of interest to people. Like Bitcoin, obviously, there's a huge amount of capital in Bitcoin, and being able to earn, yield on that Bitcoin or similar is of interest. There's a lot of Bitcoin just sitting idle that isn't being used. So I think that's a big thing that we're kind of building for, is like, how can people deploy Bitcoin, earn more Bitcoin, and that's part of the segment. And then another part is considering like there are lots of different users for tBTC, and one of the use cases that we're exploring as well is solving for kind of miner cash flow issues. For example, like miners fundamentally are very long Bitcoin, but they have to pay all of their bills in fiat. If there's some kind of full stack solution that goes from Bitcoin mining to taking out some kind of collateralized loan against that, paying down their overheads, and then kind of leveraging up on Bitcoin to some extent. I think that's also quite an interesting space, and that's not necessarily like zooming into how tBTC is used on a day-to-day basis, but something that I think is still waiting for a solution. And then on a more kind of practical user perspective, just some of the core functionality of super fast Bitcoin in and out, Bitcoin deployment directly into apps, for example, like on Aave, there's no connect your Bitcoin wallet account or wallet button at this point. And there's ways to kind of abstract Ethereum and all of this bridging stuff away from users. So I think something that I would be really interested in seeing and is kind of like a Bitcoin app store, in a sense that you have all of these products and you have like a Bitcoin user interface via a Bitcoin wallet or something like that. And you can deploy your Bitcoin directly into these strategies or into these opportunities without necessarily needing to worry about bridging, needing to worry about any of it. And it all just looks like kind of a Bitcoin native experience. And of course, under the hood, there's going to be a lot of complexity, messaging protocols, tBTC, liquidity pools, all of this kind of thing. But I think that will be the first significant UX improvement, is when people can use Bitcoin from Bitcoin chain to deploy and access these things before it kind of goes into more of like a CeFi product suite where the same rails will be working beneath the hood, but from a user perspective, it will just be a Web2 dApp, a Web2 app that they're quite familiar with at the moment. And I think that's necessary for mass adoption.
And do you see a world where, like, the likes of I don't know, all the big ETFs, even like the treasury companies, is there a pathway where they could potentially earn a yield on that Bitcoin as well?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, it all comes down to risk and custody on some level, and I think that it might be a hard sell to get tBTC as a decentralized smart contract system in its current form to kind of pass the scrutiny of the regulatory environment. And in these cases, like some of the exploration we've been doing is you kind of need like a new DeFi in order to serve yield to some of these institutional clients based on their regulation. Like some of the conversation we've had, people can't have unknown counterparties, for example. So you can't use Aave because people borrowing tBTC or who you're borrowing USD against needs to be a known counterparty to some institutions in some regulatory environments. So in that way, what is currently built and what is currently working for so many people might not work the same way for institutions, and we need to consider new products and new compliant deposit routes and things like that that don't pool funds, don't commingle assets from different unknown parties. And so I think that's really where we're headed in the next few years, at least in terms of like institutional adoption, where we'll have these kind of segregated ecosystems where there's a fully compliant, fully KYC DeFi liquidity ecosystem, and then there'll be the kind of the system that we currently have, which is permissionless and non-KYC'd. And personally, I hope that there's like a lot of interoperability between them, and places where obviously you don't have to KYC to use lending protocols. But at the same time, I think that all of the incentives at the moment are pushing people towards these kind of regulatory compliant products, and that could signal, the exclusion of part of the reason why I personally felt so inspired about DeFi is the fact that you can have this borderless global open access system where it's a miracle for financial inclusion and these things where people simply can't be compliant with the system because the infrastructure is non-existent in their country. So I think blending both, and maybe there are better solutions for those blockers as well using crypto, like different identity solutions. But I think there will start to be a bit of segmentation in terms of the on-chain liquidity, where we have the compliant KYC route and then the kind of existing DeFi liquidity system that we have.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. Well, look, Callan, as we finish up this part of the podcast, for people that are interested in exploring what you guys are building at Threshold Network, what is the best way for people to learn more, dip their toes in, and keep up to date with what you guys are up to?
Yeah, I think the best way with any of this is like try it out. And obviously, I think I'd be saying so, but get in and bridge some Bitcoin, deploy it in DeFi. It's a great thing to try out to really understand what's under the hood. And you can do that at threshold.network. That's our website, and links to the DApp from there. And then, of course, all links to social media and our Discord, where the community exists. If you're interested in learning more, asking questions, the community Discord is perfect for that. Otherwise, just staying up to date, we're on X at tNetwork. So follow us there.
Fantastic. Links are in the show notes, folks. All right, Callan, it is time to finish up the podcast. And we do that, of course, by running you through the very famous crypto conversation hot take round. Are you up for it?
Sounds great. Let's do it, Andy.
Let's do it, Callan. Just going to run some questions at you. Just want you to give me kind of quick, rapid fire, hot take style answers, if you like, just a bit of fun. Question one for you is, let's see what you say. Where would you say that you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-chain opportunist spectrum?
I think I'm definitely the perfect Venn diagram between the two, in that I think Bitcoin's an essential part of the ecosystem, but you have to be able to use it in a way. You can't use it without sacrificing it to TradFi, so we need something that overlaps the two.
Yeah, very, very well articulated. All right, well, Callan, what would you say is your firmest conviction crypto opinion?
Wow. I think that that Bitcoin is an essential underpinning, not only from a financial perspective, but from the basic principles of decentralization and blockchain. It basically proved that it can exist, and can exist in this very elegant way. And then everybody's been trying to emulate in such a way that has the same kind of longevity. So Bitcoin being the progenitor of everything, and an essential validation for a lot of the principles that crypto is built on.
I love it. All right. Bill Gates famously said that we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. So anything you like here, but I guess a Bitcoin, DeFi, Threshold, tBTC, what does it all look like in 10 years' time, Callan?
Yeah, I think it's going to look very different, like what I was saying a little bit earlier, in terms of this notion of tokens and liquidity pools and moving assets between chains. And it's also primitive in terms of how we think about digital infrastructure like the internet. And, it all just works seamlessly. There's interoperability, and it's very simple from a user perspective. And right now it's super clunky. We're building all of the primitives now and all of the rails, but in 10 years, I think, we're not even going to be thinking about tBTC as a token. We're going to be thinking about Bitcoin as a programmable infrastructure.
Yeah, love it. All right. Well, another way of thinking about this, of course, is it's a quote by William Gibson, who famously said that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So with that in mind, Callan, can you think of an example of the future being here right now, but most people aren't aware of it?
Yeah, I think decentralized infrastructure and the capacity to scale that into global solutions for identity and finance, of course, and people aren't aware that this is the best financial infrastructure that's ever existed. It's like a huge leap forward from centralized databases and all of the interoperability issues that exist in that way. We now have like an open global and permissionless infrastructure that anybody can build and interoperate on. And that's going to be the future of finance, not just for crypto, but for everything.
Yeah, very good. Brings us nicely to the final question, which is what is your favorite science fiction book, film, or TV show?
Interesting. I've recently been revisiting Brave New World, a bit of dystopian science fiction, and I think that these kind of things really help me to reflect on the current state of the world and politics and everything. I don't think we're in that kind of dystopian universe, but it's always interesting to pick apart some of the assumptions we have about the world we live in. And yeah, Brave New World's been something I've reread recently.
Love it. Yeah, great book. Yeah, also, yeah, dystopian, which is always good. Best sci-fi is dystopian. Let's close this out, Callan. Really fun talking to you today. Thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us. Just to close it out again, tell people why they should go and take a look at what you guys are building and put their Bitcoin to work, all that good stuff. Shout out your social handles, please. Go for gold.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anybody that's interested in using their Bitcoin, wanting to borrow against it or earn yield with it, check out tBTC. We're going really hard in terms of the opportunities we're creating and improving the usability. And we have the best trust assumptions out of any of these assets. So if security and trust is something that is of concern to you, and you want to use your Bitcoin, then we're the perfect solution. Check out our website, threshold.network. Check out the dApp. Go ahead and use it. It's pretty simple to use and get started. And follow us on X at tNetwork.
Awesome. Thank you, Callan. All the best, and bye for now.
Pleasure. Thanks, Andy. Take care.